The wedding hall shimmered like a dream built out of gold, light pouring down from towering chandeliers that reflected off polished marble floors, multiplying themselves until it felt as though the room held 1,000 suns. Linda stood at the center of it all, 19 years old, her body wrapped in layers of ivory silk and hand-stitched lace that felt heavier with every breath she took. The dress was beautiful. Everyone said so, but it pressed against her shoulders like a reminder that this moment was not just a celebration, it was a binding. Women surrounded her, adjusting her veil, smoothing invisible creases, murmuring blessings and well-practiced compliments. Their voices blended together into a soft hum, words about destiny, honor, and fortune floating past her ears without truly reaching her. Linda's reflection stared back at her from a tall mirror nearby, and for a brief second, she hardly recognized the girl looking out. Her face was carefully made up, older somehow, her lips curved into a smile she had been taught to wear since childhood. Only her eyes betrayed her, wide and uncertain, flickering with thoughts she dared not speak. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself of what her mother had said that morning, that this marriage was security, that sacrifice was sometimes necessary, that not all important choices felt good in the beginning. Across the hall, seated among men dressed in dark, immaculate robes, was the Sheikh. 75 years old, powerful, respected, his name spoken with a mixture of awe and caution. He did not look at the crowd, nor at the decorations meant to impress him. He sat with quiet authority, hands resting calmly, his expression composed and unreadable. When Linda glanced in his direction, their eyes met briefly. His gaze was sharp, assessing, but not cruel. Still, the moment sent a chill through her. She had met him only a handful of times. Formal visits filled with polite questions, supervised conversations, and long silences. He had never raised his voice, never touched her, never promised love. The agreement had been discussed around her, not with her. She remembered sitting on the edge of a sofa while men spoke about numbers, alliances, and futures, her presence acknowledged only as a nod. People said she was fortunate, chosen. Yet standing there now, she felt less like a bride and more like a symbol being exchanged. The music began, low and ceremonial, and a hush spread across the room. Guests turned toward her, hundreds of eyes following her every step as she began to walk forward. The aisle felt impossibly long. With each step, memories surfaced uninvited, running barefoot as a child, laughing too loudly with friends, dreaming of a future that had once seemed open and full of choice. She wondered when exactly that future had narrowed into this single path. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded as she had been instructed. She could sense the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides, from her family seated proudly in the front row, from guests who admired the union, from strangers who saw her as a story worth whispering about. No one asked her if she was afraid. No one noticed the tightness in her chest, the way her throat felt dry despite the luxury surrounding her. When she reached the front, the officiant's voice filled the hall, steady and practiced. Words about commitment, duty, and honor echoed between the walls. Linda repeated the vows when prompted, her voice soft but clear, surprising even herself. The Sheikh responded in a deeper, calmer tone, his words deliberate, unshaken. As the final blessings were spoken, applause erupted, loud and triumphant. Cameras flashed, capturing smiles and bowed heads, freezing the moment for the world to admire. Linda felt a strange numbness settle over her, as if her mind had stepped back to protect her from fully absorbing what had just happened. She was married. The word felt unreal, too large to fit inside her thoughts. After the ceremony, congratulations poured in. Hands clasped hers, kisses brushed her cheeks, voices praised her grace and beauty. She smiled, thanked them, nodded at the right moments. Inside, she felt as though she were floating just above her own body, watching herself play a role she had rehearsed but never chosen. The Sheikh stood beside her, accepting respect with a slight incline of his head, never once gripping her arm or pulling her closer. That distance both relieved and unsettled her. As the celebration continued around them, servants moved discreetly, preparing for the next stage of the night. Linda caught a glimpse of the exit doors again, tall and inviting, and for a heartbeat she imagined running, slipping out unnoticed, disappearing into the dark. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. This world was sealed, guarded, inescapable. When it was time to leave, the hall rose in one final wave of applause. Linda walked beside her husband, her steps measured, her posture straight. The doors closed behind them with a soft but final sound, cutting off the music and chatter. In that quiet moment, as they were led toward waiting vehicles that would take them to the palace, Linda felt a strange certainty settle in her chest. Whatever awaited her beyond this night, it would not be simple, and it would not be gentle. The world believed it knew her story already, believed it could guess what would happen next. As the car door closed and the city lights blurred past the window, Linda stared ahead, unaware that this was only the beginning, and that the truth of this marriage would shock everyone, including herself. The palace rose from the night like a silent kingdom carved from stone and moonlight, its gates opening smoothly as the car approached, guards bowing with practiced precision. Linda pressed her fingers together in her lap, feeling the coolness of her rings against her skin, each one a reminder that the life she had known only hours ago was already gone. Inside the car, the Sheikh sat opposite her, his presence filling the space even in silence. He did not speak, and neither did she. The road curved through manicured gardens lit by hidden lamps, their reflections sliding across the window like passing thoughts she could not hold on to. When the car finally stopped, servants opened the doors, and Linda stepped out into air scented with jasmine and night-blooming flowers. The palace corridors were vast and hushed, footsteps echoing softly as she was led forward, her dress whispering against the polished floor. Every detail seemed designed to overwhelm. Golden arches, hand-painted ceilings, doors so tall they felt ceremonial. She wondered how many secrets these walls had witnessed, how many lives had been quietly reshaped within them. She was guided into a private suite, and the doors closed behind her with a muted finality. The room was breathtaking in its luxury. Silk curtains draped from ceiling to floor, a bed large enough to feel almost symbolic rather than practical, and windows that opened onto a moonlit garden where fountains glimmered like scattered stars. Servants moved around her silently, helping her remove layers of jewelry, loosening the veil, offering water she barely touched. Their eyes were respectful, careful, as if they too sensed the tension hanging in the air. When they finished, they bowed and left, and suddenly Linda was alone. The silence pressed in on her, louder than the music from the wedding hall had ever been. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her dress with shaking hands, her thoughts spiraling faster the longer she waited. Stories she had heard in whispers crept into her mind, half-formed fears fueled by uncertainty rather than fact. She told herself to breathe, to remain composed, to remember that fear would only make things worse. The door opened slowly, and the Sheikh entered without ceremony. He leaned lightly on a cane, his steps measured, his expression thoughtful rather than expectant. Linda stood at once, her heart racing, unsure of what was required of her now that there were no witnesses. He paused when he saw her standing, then gestured gently for her to sit. The simple motion caught her off guard. He did not approach her. Instead, he moved to a chair across the room and sat down, placing his cane neatly beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt intentional, almost protective. Linda remained standing, uncertain, until he spoke again, telling her she could sit if she wished. His voice was calm, low, carrying none of the authority she had heard attributed to him by others. She obeyed, lowering herself slowly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. He studied her quietly, then sighed, a sound of weariness rather than desire. He asked her if she was afraid. The question startled her. No one had asked her that all day. Words rose to her throat, but she hesitated, unsure whether honesty was allowed here. Before she could answer, he continued, saying he would understand if she was. He told her fear had lived in palaces longer than love ever had. Linda finally looked up, meeting his eyes. They were sharp, yes, but also lined with something like regret. He surprised her again by saying that the night would not unfold as the world expected. Her breath caught. Confusion flooded her face, and she searched his expression for meaning. He told her there would be no demands, no humiliation, no performance of a role she had not chosen. The words felt unreal, too generous to trust immediately. The Sheikh began to speak about himself, not as a ruler or a legend, but as a man. He spoke of decades spent building influence, of decisions made in youth that could never be undone, of enemies created unintentionally and intentionally alike. He spoke of wealth that brought power but stole peace, of nights spent awake listening to the echo of his own thoughts in rooms far larger than any one person needed. Linda listened, stunned by the shift in tone, by the vulnerability woven into his controlled speech. Then he told her the truth he had not shared with anyone outside a small circle. His health was failing. Doctors had given him limited time. His body was weakening, but his name was still dangerous. What he needed, he explained, was not a young bride for comfort, but a legal bond strong enough to protect something important from falling into the wrong hands. That he rose slowly and retrieved a folder from a nearby table, placing it between them. Inside were documents, maps, names, accounts, and handwritten notes. Linda's eyes widened as she flipped through them, barely understanding their full significance but sensing their weight. He explained that certain assets, secrets, and responsibilities could only be transferred to a spouse without triggering wars, financial and otherwise. She had been chosen not for her beauty alone, but because she was untouched by his conflicts, invisible to his enemies. Her youth made her unthreatening in their eyes. The realization hit her like a wave, a mixture of shock and cold clarity. This marriage was not a fairy tale, nor a punishment. It was strategy. When he finished, silence filled the room again. Linda's hands trembled as she closed the folder. Her entire understanding of the night, of the marriage itself, had been overturned. She felt small and immense at the same time, frightened yet strangely relieved. The Sheikh told her she would be safe, educated, protected, and free to grow, but warned her that this life would require strength, patience, and silence. The wedding night, he said quietly, would remain a mystery to the world, and perhaps that was for the best. Linda nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks without her fully realizing it. They were not tears of fear alone, but of grief for the girl she had been, and awe at the weight of the woman she was being asked to become. Outside, the fountains continued to flow, indifferent to the truth unfolding within the palace walls. Morning arrived softly over the palace, sunlight spilling through tall windows and stretching across the marble floors like a quiet promise of continuity. Linda woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, the events of the night before settling back into her memory piece by piece. She had slept alone in the vast suite, the bed untouched except for the side she occupied, a detail that felt strangely significant. When she sat up, the weight of the ring on her finger caught the light, flashing like a reminder that nothing about her life was ordinary anymore. Servants entered with practiced grace, offering breakfast, warm water, and carefully neutral smiles that revealed nothing of what they believed had happened behind closed doors. Linda watched them move, wondering how many assumptions lived in their silence. She answered their polite questions with equal restraint, her voice calm despite the storm of thoughts still swirling inside her. As she dressed, she felt different, not lighter, but steadier, as if something fragile within her had hardened overnight. Later that morning, she was invited to walk through the gardens. The Sheikh joined her, his pace slow but deliberate, his cane tapping softly against the stone paths. The gardens were immaculate, alive with color and the sound of water, yet surrounded by high walls that reminded her of their isolation. As they walked, he spoke again, this time about what would come next. He explained that the world would watch her closely now, that every gesture, every public appearance would be analyzed and judged. She would be expected to appear obedient, ornamental, unchallenging. Linda listened carefully, committing every word to memory. He told her that appearances were tools, and that learning to use them would be her greatest protection. She realized then that he was not trying to control her, but to prepare her. That distinction mattered more than she had expected. Over the following weeks, Linda's life settled into a rhythm unlike anything she had known. Tutors arrived daily, experts in languages, history, finance, and law. At first, the lessons overwhelmed her. The information was dense, the expectations high. But Linda discovered something unexpected within herself: curiosity. She asked questions, challenged explanations, stayed awake late into the night reviewing documents she barely understood at first. The Sheikh observed her progress quietly, occasionally offering insights drawn from his own experience. Their conversations were measured, respectful, and often philosophical. He spoke to her not as a possession, but as an apprentice. Slowly, the fear that had once tightened her chest began to loosen, replaced by focus and determination. Public appearances began soon after. Linda stood beside her husband at formal events, her posture graceful, her expressions carefully controlled. Cameras captured her elegance. Newspapers speculated endlessly about her life, her happiness, her role. Some praised her composure, others pitted her youth. Linda read none of it. She had learned quickly that public narratives were rarely aligned with truth. Behind the scenes, she absorbed lessons not taught in books: how to read a room, how to notice who spoke too much and who said nothing at all, how power shifted subtly through glances and pauses. She began to understand the machinery that shaped the world around her, and her place within it. One afternoon, the Sheikh invited her into a private study lined with shelves of books and documents older than she was. He spoke more openly then about his regrets, about alliances that had cost him people he loved, about children who had grown distant, hardened by the environment he had created for them. Linda listened without judgment. She recognized loneliness in his voice, a loneliness that wealth had not softened. He told her he did not expect forgiveness, nor admiration. What he wanted, he said, was continuity, the chance for something better to grow from the ruins of his choices. Linda realized that in his own way, he saw her as that chance. As months passed, Linda changed in ways even she barely recognized. The girl who had once struggled to speak above a whisper now negotiated confidently with advisors twice her age. She learned to remain calm under pressure, to think several steps ahead, to hide uncertainty behind thoughtful silence. Yet she did not lose her empathy. When she visited charities funded by the Sheikh's wealth, she listened closely to the stories of women and children whose lives mirrored what hers might have been under different circumstances. These encounters grounded her, reminding her why the power she was inheriting mattered. The world continued to speculate about the marriage, about what truly happened on the wedding night. Rumors grew more elaborate with time, feeding on the mystery. Linda understood then that secrecy was its own form of armor. The truth was complex, unglamorous, and far more human than any story told about her. One evening, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city lights, she reflected on how completely her path had shifted. She had not chosen this life, but she was choosing what to do with it. The realization filled her with a quiet resolve. Whatever the future held, loss, responsibility, freedom, or sacrifice, she would face it on her own terms. The shock of that wedding night had not broken her, it had awakened her. Time moved differently after that, not in days or months, but in moments of quiet transformation that added up to something irreversible. The Sheikh's health declined gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, as if even his body was reluctant to surrender the authority it had carried for decades. Linda noticed the changes before anyone else. The way his steps grew slower, the pauses between breaths, the moments when his gaze drifted inward as though he were taking inventory of his life. She remained by his side, not out of obligation, but out of a shared understanding that their bond, however unconventional, had become real in its own way. In public, she maintained the image expected of her: composed, elegant, unyielding. In private, she became a steady presence, listening when he chose to speak and respecting his silence when he did not. Their relationship had evolved into something built on trust rather than illusion, a quiet alliance forged in truth rather than spectacle. As his condition worsened, the machinery of power around him began to shift. Advisors whispered more urgently, old rivals grew bolder, and distant relatives suddenly reappeared with carefully masked intentions. Linda watched it all with sharpened awareness, remembering every lesson she had absorbed. She began attending meetings alone, her presence initially questioned, then gradually accepted as her insight proved valuable. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. She learned that confidence did not require loudness, only clarity. Behind closed doors, she reviewed documents late into the night, cross-referencing accounts, tracing connections, protecting what needed to be preserved, and dismantling what threatened others. The weight of responsibility was immense, but it no longer frightened her. She understood now that power, when handled carelessly, destroyed; when guided deliberately, it could heal. The Sheikh passed away quietly one night, the palace unusually still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. There was no grand spectacle, no dramatic final words, only a sense of completion. Linda sat beside him in those last moments, her hand resting lightly on his, feeling the warmth fade. She did not cry immediately. Grief arrived later, layered and complex, intertwined with gratitude, sorrow, and a strange sense of inheritance that went beyond material wealth. By morning, the world knew. News spread rapidly, and with it came the next wave of shock. The reading of the will revealed truths few had anticipated. Linda was not merely a beneficiary. She was the central figure. Control of vast resources, foundations, and decisions passed into her hands, structured carefully to shield them from those who would misuse them. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Some expressed outrage, others disbelief. Commentators questioned her age, her legitimacy, her capability. Linda listened to none of it directly. She understood that skepticism was inevitable, and she did not rush to silence it. Instead, she acted. Within weeks, she announced initiatives that redirected wealth toward education, healthcare, and protection for women and children trapped in systems that mirrored the one she had escaped. Long-standing practices that thrived in secrecy were brought into the light and dismantled methodically. Those who had underestimated her soon realized their mistake. Linda did not seek revenge, nor did she cling to tradition for its own sake. She chose progress, guided by the quiet moral compass she had developed through experience rather than ideology. In private moments, she reflected on the night that had changed everything, the wedding night the world remained obsessed with. It had become a symbol in public imagination, a canvas onto which people projected scandal, pity, and fascination. The truth, known only to her, felt almost sacred in its simplicity. That night had not been about shock or spectacle. It had been about revelation. It was the moment she realized that strength could be given, learned, and claimed all at once. The girl who had walked into that palace trembling had walked out of that night awake, aware, and irrevocably changed. Years later, Linda stood before a new generation of young women, speaking not as a figure of controversy, but as a leader. She spoke of choice, of resilience, of the difference between the stories told about you and the life you actually live. She did not erase her past, nor did she allow it to define her limits. The palace remained behind her now, a chapter closed but not forgotten. The world would continue to debate her story, to reduce it to headlines and rumors. That no longer mattered. What mattered was the quiet truth she carried with her, that even in the most unexpected circumstances, power could be reclaimed, purpose could be forged, and a life that began in shock could end in meaning.